Hey, thanks for joining us for another week of Wednesday Hangs Online. I've got Chef with me. We're going to be continuing through cover to cover tonight. But Chef, I want where the holiday season has officially started.
Oh, boy.
Halloween just ended. We've got Thanksgiving coming up. So I would love to hear about your favorite holiday.
Okay.
Just take us down that journey.
Yeah, so I'm married to a Cuban, and I like to look at myself as half Cuban because of that. We can debate whether you believe that or not, but because of that, we celebrate a holiday called Noche Buena, and it is.
Do you know what that means?
Actually, it's the night of Christmas, I think it is.
Okay.
Or the night before Christmas.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because
cool.
it's celebrated on Christmas Eve.
Gotcha.
I don't even know Spanish.
Okay.
So
Fair enough.
Don't test me like that on camera.
All right. My mom's bad.
So Christmas Eve, you get a whole pig, and you put it. Usually, you put it underground.
Okay.
But if you don't want to eat dirty pig, you put it in a box, and so this box would cook it, and you put hot charcoal on top of it, and it cooks slowly for hours.
Yeah.
But then the finished product is like this crispy meat, skin, and well cooked pig, and so and that's a night for families to get together, and it's a super late night usually,
Gotcha.
because you're celebrating well into the first hour of Christmas,
Gotcha.
and so that had to be the kind of my favorite holiday right now.
So you still do all the Christmas festivities as well?
Yeah, so you wake up, have breakfast, and you're exhausted, but it's all.
But how long does the Christmas season last for you guys at your house with the Cuban culture? Because I was in Puerto Rico way before Christmas, and they're like, yeah, Christmas goes for 3 months here. And I was like, whoa, that's wild. So is it the same for you guys?
So again, not being only half Cuban.
Okay, cool. So you only go a month and a half.
It's a little different. So because I'm half, I kind of forget about it because I grew up in a cult where we didn't celebrate holidays.
Right.
And so I kind of forget about it until the week or a couple of days before. So we don't have a tree yet. We won't have a tree until probably the 2 weeks before Christmas. So it's not a huge.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. And you celebrate Thanksgiving though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very thankful for Thanksgiving. And
Yeah.
anybody who doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving, something's wrong with them.
Yeah. I agree. So, but anyway, so we're going to move into Jonah. That's where we are in cover to cover.
Yep.
We've been going through the Old Testament, seeing where Jesus is, seeing where we are, trying to figure out how these stories that we think may not relate to us, where we find ourselves, and who the hero is, which that hero in every story ultimately points back to Jesus.
Yep.
And so we're in Jonah. It's a very well-known story.
So
it's a good story with a weird ending,
Yeah.
very abrupt ending. And so, Chef, if you could just kind of catch us up to speed on where we are in this big story of the Old Testament, and just give us some context to what's going on. That'd be great.
So Jonah's one of those stories where I love it because it paints this picture of grace, and the grace that we see is not just for Jonah, but also for the people he's called to talk to about kind of their life, and how God wants to restore them and back to repentance. So for me, the big idea of this passage, this story is an amazing grace. And it brings me back to this story that in Cincinnati in 2015, a man was walking home. And he's a Navy vet. His name is Sam. And on his way back home, two men came from behind, and they shot him, and they robbed him. Sam ended up dying that night. And at the hearing in the courtroom, Sam's mom comes and she has to confront these murderers of her son. And she approaches them, and the judge allows her to come kind of approach these men, which usually the judge never does anything like that because she's lost her son to these murderers. And what she does is remarkable. She forgives them. She gives them a hug. And because you would think these men are older, but they were 14 and 16-year-old boys who murdered this man for $60. $60. And so the mom coming and showing this kind of forgiveness was remarkable, and a huge act of grace. But she took it a step further, and she decided, because they were so young, she decided, I'm going to start meeting with these boys regularly in prison. And so we see that grace is not just repentance, it's not just forgiveness, but it's also restorative.
Yeah.
Restoring this relationship with like, hey, I want to see these boys become better men when they even in jail, even if their lives are gone, as far as a society standpoint, man, she want to see them. And so the idea of Jonah comes into like this amazing grace that God bestows on people. And I think that story is kind of a perfect picture for that, that God has this amazing grace that surpasses just forgiveness. Like he's taking it way past just, I want to forgive them. He wants to restore us. And we see that him doing that in the life of Jonah and the Assyrians.
Yeah, and so we see if you know the story, you know that Nineveh is where Jonah is supposed to go.
Yeah.
And
supposed to.
I don't know if this is just going to, I don't know if anyone else watched VeggieTales, but like in the Jonah version of VeggieTales, they're like slapping each other with fish.
Yeah.
I hope that you guys know what I'm talking about. If not, then I apologize. I was homeschooled. Forgive me. But we know that the city of Nineveh was just not a good place.
No.
They obviously weren't slapping each other with fish. They might have been.
No.
But why was Nineveh so bad? Like what made them so like unforgivable?
Yeah, Nineveh was one of the most ruthless people groups, places because of the people there. The Assyrians were a ruthless people who, there were stories of what they would do to the people they would like attack. And so one of the things that they would do is they would bury their prisoners to their neck in the dirt, and they would grab their tongue and put their tongue in the ground so that they couldn't close their mouth, and they would leave them like that until they die. And so that's very horrific. And they just had these sadistic kind of ways of torturing and killing people. And they attacked the Israelites many times. And so the idea is, and this is not proven or factual, but the idea is there's a possibility that Jonah himself could have, even seen or had family members even affected because of the Assyrians. And so you see the passage when God says, hey, I need you to get up and go to them. He's like, them?
Yeah.
Those people?
Yeah.
Like, no. God, you don't know what you're asking me to do.
Right.
Like, do you know what they have, like, and again, this is kind of speculation, but the idea of going to people who actually affected your life and people you love is almost, it's horrible.
Yeah.
And so his reaction in that context makes sense. There are reports that mass suicides have taken place because the Assyrians were coming to attack certain people, and rather than being slaves or going through the punishment at their hands, whole cities rather die, whole towns rather die at their own hands of suicide than in the hands of the Assyrians. And so they were horrific people that God has called Jonah to go talk to about salvation.
Because God has said, I want to, restore these people. I want to restore the city of Nineveh. And that's our first point, is there's grace for the chosen. And we see that God is very much saying, like, I want these people. I want them to be saved. They'll be receptive to my word. Go. Go be there. Go do it. And Jonas, gets up and goes the exact opposite way. He goes, he finds a ship. He says, where are you going? And they're like, we're going to Tarshish. And, they're going to Tarshish? So
that's where I'm going.
That's the exact opposite way of Nineveh, right? And they said, yes. All right, I'm going to hop in with you. And so what we see is that the Lord was very much not happy with this. And because God had a plan for Jonah. And this is cool, just how, this is a great example of how God's plan is always going to work out because he's sovereign and he knows all. But Jonah runs away. He's like, all right, I'm free. And then we see this massive storm start to overtake the ship. The ship starts to sink. They're throwing off all of their luggage, all of the stuff that they're shipping, which would have been all of the reason that they were doing it. They would have made money off of it. And that's still not helping anything. And so all right, whose God is upset? Whose God is frustrated? Because they all believe different things. I love that. They found Jonah hiding, sleeping. And so they all cast lots, which is basically like, they just roll dice. They roll dice. So to them, it's fate, and it was a common practice for that to happen. But Jonah loses, so they throw Jonah off the boat. And we see him swallowed by a fish. Now, do you it says fish, and that's all we know, right?
Fish. It could have been a whale. It could have been That's all we know.
That's all we know. And there's a lot of speculation, different ways as to what it is, but it doesn't ultimately affect the meaning of the story,
he
does
still
it?
was swallowed by a fish, or something swallowed him. And my belief there is humans can't survive that.
Yeah.
And so the idea of Jonah, and you see this in the kid books.
Where he's praying on like the tongue or whatever,
and he's like, he's like in the acid of the belly of the fish, and he's still alive. Like, is that physically possible?
Right.
Probably not. And so me in my brain, the way I look at it is, man, I think he actually passed away in the belly of that fish. But 3 days later, you see like the story, a picture of Jesus, and he's able to come out, and I think God restores his life.
Right.
Like, I think he actually dies. In the belly of that fish.
Yeah, and I've heard it said that the prayer that we see, and I think chapter 2, where Jonah's prayer is, that's kind of his last breath. That's those are his final words because he thinks he's dying.
Right.
And so it ultimately spits him out on the shore of Nineveh.
Right.
And so, it's funny because the God has said, I want to restore these people. You're doing it, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And so he goes through this process. He dies and then wakes up thinking that he's in heaven, but really it's Nineveh.
It's Nineveh.
And so it's like, I can't imagine being Jonah in that moment being like, glory. But Nineveh.
Here's the cool part. So grace for the chosen is grace for the people that God has chosen to save, but also grace for the chosen one that he has sent.
Yes.
And so the grace that he shows Nineveh, he also is showing Jonah by saying, hey, listen, I could just kill you because you're being disobedient. Like, I am God, you are disobeying God.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm going to have you, I'm going to kill you literally in the belly of a whale, but then I'm going to have grace on you by restoring your life and giving you a chance to be obedient. And so the grace for the chosen is not just for Nineveh and the Syrians, it's also for Jonah, that, man, he's chosen to be sent and they're chosen to be saved. God shows grace, amazing grace for both. The amazing part of Jonah's story is he probably died.
Yeah.
And God shows amazing grace by bringing him back to life.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And that's where we see our second point is there's grace for the evil.
Yeah.
Because just like, and I think we get really bad at this, just as the Big C church, we will like rank evilness. We'll be like, oh, well, he murdered somebody, so he's worse than me, even though like I have lustful thoughts and I'm super prideful.
Super greedy.
And I'm greedy. Like, I don't give any money. I don't help anyone out. I'm all about myself.
But I'm not a murderer.
So it's okay.
Yeah, we're chilling, bro.
We're all good. We're all good, But I want to make sure I specify, you're not a murderer. I was just talking about that guy over there.
I'm not.
But there's grace for the evil, even the evil that Jonah committed, which was direct disobedience, which I would argue is worse because the people of Nineveh were acting in ignorance. They didn't know who God was. They didn't know that, like, hey, even though you're like, well, if they're literally letting people die by their tongue being on the ground, like, yes, they should know that's evil, but they don't understand that, like, that God is there and that God has standards and that God has requirements. Right. And so they're acting out of ignorance, whereas Jonah knows and he chooses to be disobedient. Paul kind of talks about that too in the New Testament.
Right.
But it's like there's the grace for both evils. And we see in Jonah 3 verse 10, God saw their actions, that they had turned away from their evil ways. So God relented from the disaster he had threatened them with, and he did not do it.
So awesome.
And that's because Jonah ultimately goes up to them and says, like, all right, here's God. And I imagine that being like Jonah walks up, he says, hey, God's going to kill you. You need to repent. And he walks out.
He's like, I'm out.
And he's like,
I did it.
And that's the crazy thing is that, and this goes into like when we talk about evangelism, like I'm not saying that that's how it went. Jonah may have gone in there and given his best, illustration, best sermon ever. Right. But I would imagine with the nature of how he felt about those people.
It was still hard, man.
Yeah, he didn't care. Yeah. And so, even so we don't have to get into that, but, Jonah does this, and then the people of Nineveh are all like, oh, we're awful.
Let's do it.
Like, and they repent.
We need God.
They you see them get in the kind of ceremonial clothing, the sackcloth, to where they're just like mourning their evil, their wickedness, and God saves them.
Yep.
And the crazy thing, just a kind of side point, is that we talk about like, oh, like I have to lead someone to Christ. I have to share the gospel. I have to do this. I have to do this. It's not you.
Yeah.
Like Jonah probably didn't really care about any of them coming to Christ. He actually most likely went back to the beach and said, all right, burn it down.
Yeah, he wanted them dead.
Yeah.
Like he wanted God to judge them. Like he's like, God, like this is opposite of what you should be doing to this people. Like this is not the way. This is not justice.
Yeah.
This is not justice. And so he's looking at God like, you were supposed to be a just God. Cap. I don't believe it.
Yeah. Like if you're going to save these people, then you don't actually care about justice.
Yes.
And that's the crazy thing is that grace for these evil people, for Jonah, because Jonah disobeyed God and had genuine hatred for an entire group of people. It wasn't just one person.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a bully or just this whatever. It was an entire people group that he never met.
Yep.
He never met these people.
Yep.
And he wants to see them all dead.
Yep.
And God gives grace to both of them. Because what we see is that God restores the people of Nineveh. Jonah's pouting. He's on the beach, still upset. And you know what God does?
Yeah.
God like sends him a plant to bring him shade so he doesn't just fry under the heat of the sun.
Amazing grace, bro. Amazing grace.
And so what we see is that the story of Jonah just kind of ends, right?
Yeah.
It just ends there. It's like, and Jonah was upset, and then it's like, cut screen, the end.
It literally says in Jonah 4, it says, Jonah was greatly displeased and became furious. He prayed to the Lord, please, Lord, isn't this what I said while I was still in my own country? That's why I fled toward Tarshish is the first place. I knew that you were a gracious, that's what he says, I knew you were a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love, and one who relents from sending disaster. He literally says, God, I knew you were an amazing God. I knew you were passionate. I knew you were graceful. And because of that, that's why I didn't want to go here, because I knew you weren't going to give the justice they deserve. And he just literally just mad.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, you can be sitting here like listening, going, "Well, why would Jonah like hold it back from them? Like that's such a terrible thing to do. Like, why would he hold back this gospel, this grace,
this good news,
and this good news?" And the crazy thing is that like I feel convicted right now in the sense of that's me. Like I don't take the time to share the gospel. Like I am Jonah. I may not be doing it out of direct hatred, but I'm doing the same thing of like, man, like, yeah, these people, they need Jesus, but I don't care. Like, I don't want to get uncomfortable.
Right.
I don't want to have someone potentially look at me weird. So I don't really say anything. And
digging deep right there.
And like, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And like, and it's not to make me feel bad or make us feel bad, but we have this calling. Like we have the same call that Jonah has of, we know, like, I know if you're listening right now and I say, think of someone that you know is not a believer, there is someone that comes to mind immediately.
100%.
And that's up to you to go share the gospel with your words, but then continue to be around them and be Jesus to them.
Yeah.
You know, don't treat them as a project. Treat them as a friend.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. I think that a lot of people, we can get into that, and that's another time. But, you know, it's just that idea of there are kind of three people in this story. There's the people that are represented by the people of Nineveh that don't know God, that are evil, that are wicked, and need Jesus.
The Syrians.
There's the people that are like Jonah that run from God's plan. And don't want to do what God has asked them to do or what God has called them to do. And then there are the people that are upset with what God's plan is and are like, "What God? Like, why do you have me here?" And so that's kind of the question that I want to kind of end with is who are you? Do you need the grace? Do you need to be forgiven? Do you need this relationship with Jesus? Or do you need the grace because you're running from what God has given you, what God has asked you to do? Or do you need grace because, you know, you're upset with what God has placed you in? But the key is that the question is, do you need grace? And the answer is always yes. And so, Chef, you know, do you have anything else as we kind of wrap up the story of Jonah?
I'll say, I think as we look at Jonah's story, he is a perfect picture of the human response to when God calls us to hard things. Because his response was very genuine. Like, we run from hard things, and because sometimes it's emotionally hard for us to see what God is calling us to do. And so physically, Jonah is capable of doing everything God has called him to do. Emotionally, he is saying, God, I feel like vomiting every time I think about you calling me to this people, because there's an emotional connection to what he's calling them to do. And so, man, this is a very real experience that he's shown us in this book, because it is our experiences at times where God has called us to man, that bully who's, man, for the last 2 years has bullied us, and then you figure out somebody in that bully's life has died, and God's called you to go pray for that bully, and you're like, the same bully who put me in the locker, like the same bully who tripped me, the same bully who's been like that. You want to go pray for that bully? God, are you serious?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? No. I'm not praying for that bully, and I can't believe you called me to pray for that person. And God said, you're going to do what I called you to do, and you're not going to like it, but it's going to be what I called you to do. And so, man, kind of understanding that side of it, like there is an emotional connection to God's calling, and it's not going to be always easy. But at the end of the day, you know God is gracious, and he's passionate about those he's chosen. And if they're evil or good, doesn't matter. He's still God.
Yeah, that's so true. And so if we've talked about something that you have questions about, or you want to just talk about more, there's a number that's coming across the screen right now. Just text the word talk to that number, and we want to connect with you. We want to help you kind of process this out. And so if you're watching with friends or you're watching by yourself, we'd love to see that. If you want to take a screenshot or take a picture and post it on Instagram, it's at LH Students. We'd love to connect with you online. And so there'll be some questions on the screen. I would encourage you to take time, ask yourself those questions, process through everything that we've talked about. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a tool to help you, and ask yourself those questions, ask your friends, your family those questions, and really just kind of be in this moment.
Dig a little bit, search yourself, like, man, what is hindering you from being obedient?
Yeah, and because we all need grace.
Yep.
And it's seen so clearly here, because we're either Jonah or we're the people of Nineveh, and there's no in between. So we hope you guys have enjoyed this. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you guys next week.